2022. So that would be up next Monday. So what is going to be the album for that one? Well, I'm going to go a little bit different here. I'm actually going to at least pay somewhat, I don't know. I don't know if you can say pay tribute, but I'm definitely going to at least spotlight an album that it was my introduction to this very underrated and criminally, I still can say criminally overlooked, because he doesn't get much credit that he does, for at least when it comes to at least just straight up shredders in the United States here in the 70s. A guy that doesn't get a whole lot of credit, but Eddie Van Halen, who again, rightfully at times though, deserves some sort of credit, but this guy I think was definitely one of the earliest rock shredders. But I'm talking about Ronnie Montrose. And the album that I'm going to actually pick is the album that actually introduced me to his guitar playing. And I'm not talking about the very first Montrose album, or at times maybe his other projects like Gamma. No, I'm going to be looking at is his solo album from 1991, that is Mutatis Mutandis. That was the album that actually had introduced me to Ronnie Montrose, and since again, 1991, it has already reached its 30th anniversary. So I'm going to at least just do a spotlight on that album. And since I just revisited it at least a week ago, or just a week ago or so, obviously it just made me wonder why I don't really listen to the album that much. Again, I think it's a very underrated album. So that is the one that I'm going to pick for episode number 122 of the album of the week. So I hope all of you are looking forward to that one. So there we go.
Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 125. Now, originally I wanted this to be the album for episode number 122. However, with the passing of Dusty Hill at a week or so, I decided that I wanted to hold this album off, or at least just my overall spotlight on this album off, and basically just focus on, well, El Loco from ZZ Top. But then, of course, after being suggested to possibly spotlight the Human Factor from Metal Church for just to further pay more tribute to the passing of just Mike Howe, just to pay more tribute to Mike Howe, I decided that I was going to make that one to be episode number 123. And then for episode number 124, since the anniversary, or the 10th anniversary for the debut album from Dark the Living Dead was coming up, I then ended up making that album to be episode number 124. So the only other episode left, I guess, for number 125, only thing left, since nothing else was coming out this, or at least as far as anniversaries, nothing was really coming up. So it just made it easy for me to make this one finally to make this album just my overall spotlight on this particular album, just for this episode, for episode number 125. So here we are. It is none other than the fifth studio album from the late, and in many ways, I still say somewhat the unsung guitar hero from the 1970s. It is Mutatis Mutandis by Ronnie Montrose. Originally released in 1991. It's never really specified what month or even day that this was released on, at least in 1991, but it was released in 1991 through I.R.S. Records. And of course, it was self-produced by Ronnie Montrose, because he really began doing a lot of that within the 1980s. Even producing some albums for even like Wrath and Heathen, since they're all both, which is, Heathen at least was from, I believe, the San Francisco area, like Ronnie Montrose, but Wrath was, I think, was from Chicago, so I don't know how that came about. I think because of, I don't know how that turned out, but apparently that's what happened. So he did a lot of production work for some other metal bands too. which again is almost an honor because again, Ronnie Montrose definitely was a hell of a guitar shredder for his time period, and the just the overall plethora of artists he had been just played with, besides his own stuff, even introducing the world to Sammy Hagar, and of course to Trevor William Church's dad, Bill Church, basically of Haunt, to the entire world. So yeah, it's obviously the guy basically I think doesn't get enough credit for introducing a lot of some of big names as well. I guess you can say, again, Sammy Hagar being the biggest name he had introduced. Some may hate him for that because of Van Halen. Fuck you, I don't care. Who gives a shit? Still, it still at least shows the somewhat the, I guess, magnitude or whatever. I can't use a whole lot of great analogies somehow for today. They're not coming to me, but for just the overall historicness, I guess, behind Ronnie Montrose. But this was his 5th solo album. His first, of course, came out in 1978, which was titled Open Fire. It was probably, I think his final album for at least for Warner Brothers Records, again, for the contract. So that was it. Then he basically went on to even forming Gamma, and released at least 3 albums there for at least Elektra, and I think and still had at least some label stuff, or just still my contract obligations for at least Elektra there, and then Enigma coming back with doing more solo stuff within the 1980s. So just the overall, just the plethora of stuff even behind his name is just a complete. It's definitely astonishing in its own right. But definitely that's why I say he's definitely up there as one of the most unsung guitar heroes. Definitely inspiring a lot of the likes. Like, for example, like Joe Satriani, maybe even Steve Vai in some cases too. And of course, there's even a little underlining, maybe a little bit to Eddie Van Halen. So there's always that. Again, of course, Ted Templeman. So being one of the first people to actually produce the first Montrose album for Van Halen. So there's so many things you can say that obviously you can, as far as historicness or just overall, just I guess Hall of Fame worthy almost, just to the name of Ronnie Montrose. There's a lot of just amazing things, I guess, to him basically, and doesn't get a whole lot of credit half the time. But this was his 5th, and this is definitely one of those great showcases of how he was one of, and it is a very much, it should have been more, just a lot more, he should have got a lot more credit because of his playing on this album is still fucking great. Again, this was my introduction to Ronnie Montrose's, just his overall personality. This was my introduction to him before I ever really heard the first Montrose album. So this was my debut to his stuff, basically just my introduction. And as a kid, I was definitely a little bit astonished by a lot of the guitar playing and so on, just his craftsmanship. And I was definitely just gobsmacked by some of it. This was even before I even heard, guys like either Joe Satriani or even Steve Vai. But just hearing his playing on here, you can tell that he might have been one of the biggest influences and one of the biggest creations for a lot of that. You can tell he might have taken a lot of influences from a lot of jazz fusion and maybe even funk musicians and whatnot. Yeah, from the 70s. Maybe Jeff Beck could probably come to mind. But he just has his own unique feel. That's all him. And it's still very well played. He plays with a lot of preciseness still. Again, to say he could be United States' answer to maybe, I don't know, Michael Schenker is probably a little bit too, just maybe a little bit stretching it, but they almost have a very similar feel where everything is just played precise to at least every note is played perfectly almost. It's like everything just has its own feel and of course its own atmosphere. So and that's one thing about this album. Even though there are plenty of rockers that will definitely take you back to at least to some of its greater moments. I mean, I like the title track, which opens up, which is a slow, very methodical, but has an atmosphere to its own with some great fucking guitar playing, of course, which is always going to be spread out through this entire album because it's all instrumental. But that's for an instrumental album. This is one of those where it just has personality. It's not just notes for the sake of notes, like you expect with the note scene. Anyways, it's not everything is completely just note for the just playing notes for the sake of it and see how fast I can play. Everything has its own personality. Everything is played to at least you can say perfection almost. And again, production, nice production work, but everything just has its overall personality and its own song has its own unique feel at most of the time. Everything has their own character, and that's one of the highest points you can say. It's about Ronnie Montrose's craftsmanship and his overall work ethic, and is what he can compose a track on this album. But but as far as just straight up rockers, then it goes into the song that I really remember the most off this album. Before I ever really revisited this album a couple of some weeks ago actually, and just being mesmerized and surprised at how I don't listen to this album a lot more than I should, because I really should have listened to this album a lot more because of there's some fantastic work here on it. But again, the one song that I always remember the most of it, and it always brings a little piece of nostalgia to me. I always can be taken back to a particular time in my childhood, but it's the second track on here, which is Right Saddle, Wrong Horse. And it has, again, a little bit of an AOR kind of feel going on. It's very upbeat, it has a nice sort of groove going to it. But again, very similar, you can say, to a guy maybe like Joe Satriani. But it has its own unique character, and it still has some great fucking guitar playing. And I think to some it might seem cheesy, but I think when you actually do give some time to it, it is very well put together. It is really the kind of it's definitely one of the more upbeat rockers on here, but it's not a heavier track, but it just has its overall character to it and personality, where I think it just comes off naturally and it just sounds great. And of course you get some other slower tracks like Heavy Agenda. Greed Kills has some nice stuff going on there. Mercury, they've been one of the more calmer songs. That's one thing. This album, even without when you take away at least some of the rockers, being like, again, the first track, Right Saddle, Wrong Horse, and then of course Zero Tolerance, and maybe even Company Policy, which that one kind of goes really more into the almost keyboard-laced AOR structuring, but it still is a very nice rocker. Its own right, and had its own unique feel going on there. But without that, when you got songs like Mercury, Velox, The Nomad, and Tonga, there are very calm and relaxed numbers, but they all have a very nice atmosphere going on, where it's just you can almost you can say it is probably summertime music at most of the time, but you can play this at night half the time and just be relaxed by it. It has such a nice, calm feel to it. And again, I think that's what one of the other sort of highlights to his writing and his overall composing on here. It's just, everything's just nicely put together. And again, everything doesn't come off like completely forced or anything. Everything just feels like it flows well. Everything's got a nice consistency going on to it. And everything just, again, just overall atmospheres and the experimentation sometimes with certain instruments. Like, again, some of the acoustic stuff comes very Spanish-like before they get into some great sort of just, again, some of the just great fucking guitar playing overall. But everything just, it's just all atmosphere. That's the one thing. Everything just has its own unique atmosphere that works well for each of the song and fits most of the song, whatever the mood is. It's perfect for those particular songs, and they just are very relaxed and very calming, but they still have a very nice, overall, just a consistent feel to them. But again, a song like Zero Tolerance, to go back to one of the rockers on this album, this is probably, for an instrumental, this is one song that really has a nice callback to Gamma. Again, to the more somewhat almost keyboard-laced heavy rock of Gamma, like the first two albums in general, since I'm really more so familiar with those first two. Again, with this album, you're not going to, if you're expecting, again, the first Montrose, it's not that kind of album. With Ronnie Montrose, when he does his own solo stuff, you have to almost put in the mindset of his solo material for the most part, and maybe even a little bit of Gamma. You kind of have to keep that mindset here, and if you do, and you accept that, you definitely do find a lot of enjoyable playing here. Again, he definitely seems to be one of those that when he writes his own material, he doesn't try to copy a lot of past stuff. Even though, again, Zero Tolerance, if it had Davey Patterson's vocals behind it, it would have easily would have been on one of the Gamma albums. For example, I think the first two really are the one that comes to mind, and maybe even like Greed Kills and whatnot, all would have sounded fine on Gamma albums. But at the same time, you got songs like in Mercury Velox and even the Nomad and Tonga. They're very much interesting. Of course, even go back to a song like Heavy Agenda, which actually does kind of harken back to the more funk-based kind of stuff that you would have expected off of Open Fire. But again, just to I know I'm like all over the place half the fucking time, so I apologize. Either way, I can get into so much within the timeline that I have for this overall Album of the Week episode. But I'm just trying to get in all my thoughts and on here. But again, stuff like, again, the Commerce stuff are almost closer, just unique to this own particular album. So he really tried to change things up with here. Now, I'm probably going to sound biased because I'm not that familiar with a lot of his solo material. Again, the only comparison I can make off of is probably Gamma. And maybe even some of the stuff he might have would have tried to produce for example, maybe Y&T, the album that he should have produced, and the old demos that he did for them. You know, that's the only thing I probably can make comparisons of, even that one's a fucking stretch. Either way, they all sound unique to this own particular album, and that's why I say this is very well is one of his finest solo albums. And again, it'd be unfair to try and say that this isn't his finest if you're only comparing, or you're just going basing your opinions off the first Montrose. It's unfair to do that. So going off of some of his solo material, if you liked a lot of his solo material, that's what you're going to base your opinions off of. And here, this is definitely one of his finest solo albums. It's definitely, as far as just crafting just great relaxing, calming, and just atmospheric tracks, and with his overall guitar playing, which again doesn't get enough credit than it really should. He definitely is a king in that department. He owns that department, and that's why a lot of guys like Joe Satriani and even Steve Vai obviously looked up probably to a guy like Ronnie Montrose and took in a lot of influences. Steve Vai maybe done it with Eddie Van Halen for the most part, but every one of them had to at least looked up to Ronnie Montrose and were inspired. So again, the playing on this album, it shows that he was definitely a trendsetter in that, because he's definitely belongs in the list of some of the best guitar players that come out of the 1970s, and it's not all shredding half the time. He's got his own personality, and it oozes throughout this entire instrumental album. Again, everything's all well put together, so that's all I can say there. It's definitely a great album, and I always enjoy putting this one on again. Again, even just refreshing my mind, I'm still kind of surprised how I don't play this album enough when I really should. It's just a very good album, so there you go. That's it. After this, of course, Ronnie Montrose would release, plenty of others. He would release a few more solo stuff. He would even contribute to even a video game soundtrack in 1986 called Mr. Bones. He would even then do, would even at times even reform Gamma. You know, he was still doing plenty of things within there. sadly before he took his own life on March 3rd of 2012, and that it was definitely a pretty much a heartbreaker in that point, because of, again, just such a underrated, and again, and I do use the term underrated, obviously, and I do use it quite with a lot of emphasis on the word underrated, because he truly was. He doesn't get a lot of credit, doesn't get enough credit for a lot of the stuff he did. Again, bands like Iron Maiden and even new wave of British heavy metal band Avenger, whatnot, you know, they've all at least have covered his stuff, and yet he doesn't get enough credit, doesn't get a lot of recognition from at least the fucking Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He's probably not even worthy of them. He probably doesn't even deserve to be within the fucking joke that is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Because of, obviously, he deserves to be part of a Hall of Fame that actually will respect his fucking guitar playing for that. He should be part of a fame that actually respects him. So, and will even fucking get down on their fucking knees and actually kiss the floor that he actually walked on. You know, there we go. But it was definitely a bit of a sad day. But at least he left behind just an overall plethora, which I'm using that word a lot more, I guess, during this video. But it truly is a plethora of just a legacy he left behind of albums and whatnot. Just truly a great guitar player, and definitely one that I think deserves to be given the credit that he should definitely be given. There we go. That's it. If you were familiar with this album from Ronnie Montrose, if you actually had heard this album, you can leave your comments in the comment section below, whether they'd be, for example, positive or negative. You can leave them in the comments section below. But if you have never heard this album and you really are very curious about his solo period, I would say if you can find a copy of this out in the wild, because it's not very easy to get a hold of. This album is obviously been out of print since 1991. It's never been reissued as far as I know. So it's a very hard to get a hold of album, and some people want at least $40 or $50 for this. Especially on Discogs, they want at least $50 at least for this album. Especially even if you want a Japanese copy, they even want more for it. So trying to get a hold of this album physically is not going to be easy for you. But if you ever come across this in the wild, again, being the record stores or even flea markets, whatever, if you see this amongst a stack of CDs, pick it up and give it a chance. I think you might at least enjoy it. If you like just good, just straight up instrumental guitar playing, rock guitar playing, you know, just great, just that overall genre, I think you'll like it. And if you're really, again, if you're just one of those that are curious about his solo stuff, because if you're mostly familiar with the stuff he put out with like Montrose and Gamma, again, I don't think you'll do yourself any wrong. It may not be your thing, but again, at least give it a chance and see if it's something for you. If you like it, enjoy it all for a fucking lifetime. So there you go. Hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrasher saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.